We're thrilled to welcome Matt Cohen, Managing Partner at Osage University Partners, to the show today. Matt, thank you once again for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Let's kick things off. Would you share a brief personal intro with us?
Sure, Chris, happy to. And again, thanks very much for having me on. This is a great series that you do, and you've had great people on, so feel honored that you asked. As Chris said, I'm a managing partner at Osage University Partners, or OUP for short, as we go by now as much as possible. I'll give you my background briefly, and we can get more into it later if there's interest. But I'm a scientist by training. Did my undergrad at Penn State, and then went and did my Ph.D. in viral immunology at University of Pennsylvania. Like most, took the full 5.5 years on average, to get it done. And but while I was at Penn, I had some really great experiences working with Penn Biotech Group through Wharton and some other clubs, and started looking around for opportunities where I could bridge business and science, and ultimately landed on consulting, just a place where I wanted to start my career. So after finishing my Ph.D., I went to L.E.K. and spent a number of years out of their New York office, doing a lot of projects for pharma, med tech, some private equity work, and really enjoyed my time there and loved the people, but eventually felt a little burned out and wanted to look for something new to do, and looked around at lots of opportunities, and really just we can talk more about this later, but got lucky and had an opportunity to move back down to Philadelphia. I grew up in this area as well, so I was excited to come back to Philly. Love this city, and started at OUP as an associate, and I've been here for the last 9 years, and still love it.
It's always nice when you get to go home, and it's even better when you get to do something you love. But before we dive too deep, can you just provide a brief intro to OUP for us?
Oh yeah, absolutely, sure thing. So OUP, we are a venture capital fund. We have a unique model in that we almost exclusively invest in companies that have spun out from or licensed IP from universities and research institutions that we've partnered with. And so we partner now with 100 different institutions, most of them here in the United States, but also some international institutions in Canada, Israel, the UK, and Singapore. And really the crux of our model, or the uniqueness of our model, is that we partner with these institutions whereby they assign to our fund the rights they have within their license agreements to invest in their own startups. In exchange, we take a portion of our profits, which for the VCs out there come out of the general partner carry pool. We have 20 points of GP carry like most funds, and we take 5 of those points, we put them in a pool, and then we have a formula by which we share that back with the universities that we've partnered with. To give you a little history here, the whole idea for the fund got started actually out of Penn. A guy by the name of Lou Berneman, who ran Penn's tech transfer office for about a decade, started about 80 plus companies during his tenure at Penn. This was in the 90s. Would put these rights to invest that Penn could invest into the license agreement. So these companies would go and they might raise really compelling venture capital rounds from Sequoia or Kleiner Perkins, and Lou would go to the administration and say, hey, we have the right to put in $3 million or $5 million into this round. It's being led by a top tier VC. It's really exciting technology. They got a great management team. We should do this. And they would say, no, like, we don't invest in startups. That's not what we do. All of these universities and institutions have very large endowments, right? But those endowment managers really aren't allocating small amounts of capital just to individual companies. That's not really in their purview. They're moving $50, $100 million at a time. And then the tech transfer offices, right? They're busy. They're filing invention disclosures, IP, prosecuting IP. They're really not in the business of doing due diligence, tracking investment opportunities. That's not what they do either. And then there's some political ramifications, right? If you think about a university institution that says they're going to invest in their own startups, what happens when you say, okay, I'm going to invest in Professor A's company, but I'm not going to invest in Professor B's company? And what's going to happen really, around those kind of decisions, moving forward. So it can be just really challenging for universities to make those investments directly. And so Lou had this idea, which was, well, I have these rights. It's an interesting asset. They're going unexercised. And so what if we could assign them to an external third-party independent fund that could exercise those rights on our behalf? And so OUP got started with just a small amount of GP money, about $10 million. And it was just to see if this worked. Could a university assign to OUP the rights to invest? Could OUP make an investment? And what would happen? And so it turned out it works. It worked well, and they made a small series of small check investments initially, starting with 4 universities. And once they figured out it worked, they went out and raised the bulk of our first fund, which is $100 million. Since then we've grown tremendously. As I said, we've scaled from 4 universities now to 100 universities. We have 20 core partners and 80 what we call our associate partners. And those core partners, that we spend a lot of time with and really focus on, represent over 80% of the deals that we actually invest in and the capital we actually deploy. And that's institutions like MIT, Stanford, Harvard, Penn, Yale, UCSF, Florida, Michigan, a kind of a long list of really, prominent institutions that do a lot of startups. So we've scaled tremendously since OUP 1. We raised our second fund back in 2015, which was $215 million. Our third fund's $273 million, which we're actively investing out of now. And so, we're sort of toward the back end of that and wrapping up our last few investments from OUP 3 kind of right now. So that's really OUP, sort of what makes us unique and kind of how the model operates. Turns out that over time, that model lends itself to a lot of really interesting opportunities. So because we have rights in all of these startups, it meant that, we should track all of these startups. We should have some way of speaking to these companies over time. These rights actually don't expire if they go on exercise. So if you pass on a Series A or a university passes on an A, they persist into the Series B. Now the rights might get smaller if they're pro rata driven, right, based on the university's ownership. So they may get smaller for the next round, but they don't go away. They still, just like any other preemptive right a VC might have, right? Unless there's a pay to play in the round, your rights are going to persist, even if you didn't participate and maybe skipped a round. So what we've done is we built basically a database. We've used Salesforce, just because it turns out it's a CRM issue. And now we have a startup database of 8,000, almost actually 9,000 now, active startups out of our 100 universities. These are active companies that are actually alive today. I think over the history of OUP, we've tracked 13,000 companies, to be honest. And a lot of them have gone on to go public, be acquired, or just died. And of those 8,000 companies, they're not all really interesting. Only a portion or a fraction of them are potentially venture financeable even. Many of them could, may never need to raise $1 of venture capital to be successful anyways. So it turns out about, 2,000 of them are really the most interesting. And that's where, we spend most of our time tracking roughly those 2,000 companies. With that and with our growth over time, we've sort of realized that we can invest very early in seed or Series A rounds. We can invest later if we think the optimal time might be a Series C or D or crossover investment round. And then over the last couple of years, we've started to become more active in company creation. We've done that often partnering up with other venture funds that we've worked with in the past, help start a couple companies, get them off the ground based on university intellectual property. One of those was from University of Pennsylvania and University of Pittsburgh. We did one out of WashU in St. Louis, one out of UNC. So, we've done these a couple of times, and we plan on doing that more kind of as we move forward into future funds.
Matt, do you mind if I actually ask you a question around that point?
Please, yeah, jump in there.
So you're tracking IP coming from numerous universities, and it sounds like you're doing so even before the companies are potentially spun out and turned into newcos. So are you also thinking about this from a collaboration perspective, where you can bring IP together that's complementary from different universities into this venture creation process? And I know we're jumping ahead, but
yeah, no, absolutely. No, it's a great question and something we get asked a lot, right? So let me clarify. So, we don't track all of the IP from all these 100 institutions. That would be
monumental.
Almost impossible. It would be impossible. So we don't track IP, we track the startups. So, we track every startup that actually gets formed, whether they take an option or a license, we track that. We then track a decent number of companies pre-formation or pre-license or pre-option when we know that they're professors thinking about starting a company, or there's potential for maybe a company to come out of it. We do that selectively. We don't do that on everything. We do that on the ones we think could be really interesting. So it's a small portion of what we do. But to answer your question, what is the opportunity to pull IP from different institutions together into a single entity where it may be more valuable together than apart? That's something we've thought about and talked about for a really long time. And it turns out it's just really challenging. It's really hard. Without getting too deep into the process of licensing IP from universities, do you go and negotiate separately for the pieces with each institution? Do you have the institutions form an interinstitutional agreement where one institution agrees to sort of be the lead? That's usually only workable if like 2 faculty from different institutions contributed to a single invention. You can just negotiate with one usually. But if you're talking about totally separate inventions from 2 totally separate places, you're probably going to need to negotiate those separately. It's a lot of work. It can be really challenging. The economics can get tough, can stack. So it can just be really hard. Who knows if those faculty or founders could get along or want to work with each other. But so there's a lot of hurdles. So let me just say that. That said, if you can make it work, if you can find an opportunity where there's multiple pieces of IP from different places, that can be really compelling and really powerful. And maybe later we can talk more about, how does OUP work with the companies we invest in? Where do we think we add value? Because oftentimes what may be best is to start a company around a single piece of IP or a single technology, and then get that off the ground, get that going, and then maybe bring in something complementary from somewhere else, maybe down the road once you kind of get things moving a little bit. I think trying to pull all the pieces together at founding, it's possible. It just can be challenging.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and thank you for diving into that. Forgive the interruption. You were going through a little bit more of the overview, and want to make sure we.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of finalize by saying, this is we're talking about bio and healthcare and life sciences. I just want to make sure it's clear that that's not all OUP invests in. We invest in both life sciences and tech because universities are prolific in lots of different areas. Tech is everything that's not life sciences, and we have a team that works on that, and that's software and semiconductors and quantum computing and hardware and really robotics, everything else you can think of that's not life sciences. And then within life sciences, we invest in therapeutics, tools, diagnostics, devices, but the vast majority of our investments historically have been and probably will continue to be in therapeutics. That's really where we spend most of our time. We've got a couple device investments in the portfolio, a couple diagnostic investments, a research tools investment. So they're all areas of interest, and we'll look at all those opportunities. We track all of them coming out of the universities, but really the bulk of what we invest in ends up being therapeutics. But I want to say it's great having a tech team. I think it's great having a tech team as life sciences becomes more tech enabled, as AI and machine learning and these quote unquote black boxes that quite frankly I can't understand. I have no idea how some of these software packages work. I have no idea how people are applying computation to drug discovery. Not my background, not my area of expertise. I can't diligence it. I have people on my team that is their background. They can understand it. And if they join me for a diligence call or call the company and they can't understand it, it tells me something.
That makes a lot of sense. And as you say, as life sciences becomes more interdisciplinary, having people to support you, as always about the people.
Yeah, to do research tools investing, right, and just be a life science investor, it's really hard. They got to build a box. That's engineering. That's photonics. That's stuff way outside my area, of expertise. And so you can always get a consultant, but it's great having people on the team.
No, agreed. And by the same token, I just want to call out and say OUP's, the way the fund was originally built and developed around these contractual rights from the university, incredibly unique and incredibly exciting. We always talk about in VC proprietary deal flow. Here you have contractual, and I think
it is really contractual deal flow. And what's been great is we syndicate and work with lots of different VCs. We've worked with probably everyone out there across our 110, 115 portfolio of companies, and And, we share a lot of our deal flow. What's great is, we see something interesting early and we think it's great fit for another fund. We'll introduce them to other investors. We want to work with other people. Very much part of our model.
And I want to dive into that deeper, as we've been saying, but first, let's take a step back because I want to hear more about you, and I'm sure the audience will too. So let's talk about, Matt, your journey to VC. And as you described, you completed your undergrad degree in microbiology before pursuing your PhD in cell and molecular biology at Penn, during which time you worked with the Penn Biotech Group and also advised a number of startups. But let's even take that a step back and ask, so starting at the beginning, what brought you to bio?
Yeah. So let's go way back. Let's start with 5th grade. And this is before I had any interest in bio. I remember vividly in 5th grade there being a stock picking. I don't know if it wasn't a class, but it was like a module within 5th grade where we would go back. There was really no internet, so you get the newspaper, and it would print all of the stocks on the stock market, and every day it would tell you if that stock went up or it went down. And you had to pick some stocks. And I remember my group, my little team, we got 1st place. Like, we made the most money, virtual money, over a period of whatever it was, 3 months.
Nice.
And it was, totally silly because as 5th graders, we had no idea what we were doing or what we were buying. I believe the stock was called Best Buy, and it was right in the name. It said it's the Best Buy, right? So why wouldn't you buy that? We thought that was interesting, so we bought that. Well, it turns out Best Buy as a retailer was exploding when I was in 5th grade, and stock went up a lot. So that was a good one. So I started having interest in just, stocks, investing in companies, and that stuck with me. And I thought, oh, maybe I'll be a stockbroker when I grow up, right? I'm a little kid and thought that was interesting. And then when I got to high school, was taking a lot of classes, AP classes, and just really did very well in bio. I really liked biology. I was better in biology than I was in physics, math, chemistry. So I liked all of those, but it took a lot of work. I wasn't the best. I wasn't the #1 math student. But biology just clicked for me. A lot of people say, I have to memorize so much stuff, and for me, it never felt like memorization. It felt like I could absorb the concepts. I did a lot of visualization of, what would a molecule look like, or what would something in a cell look like interacting in 3-dimensional space? And I just was able to remember and think about, those things. And so, so I really liked bio and ended up thinking, all right, well, I'm gonna go to college and I want to major in this. And, I was trying to figure out, at Penn State, should I go into bioengineering or should I do something bio, not without the engineering piece? And actually, my freshman year at Penn State was the first year they offered a bioengineering major. But what kept me away from it was that they were requiring you to double major in another engineering degree. So you had to, if you were doing bioengineering, you had to double major in electrical engineering or mechanical engineering, or another engineering major. And so that wasn't super. That wasn't really of interest to me. So I ended up doing microbiology. And, the reason why I really liked microbiology was, it turns out I, really liked infectious disease. And I traced that back to just loving the movie Outbreak. When that movie came out, Dustin Hoffman, and just, tremendous movie, just was really fascinating how infectious disease works, how do viruses work. And I mentioned, really thinking about how do you visualize, things interacting in 3-dimensional space? How do you visualize a virus interacting with a cell and getting in and unpackaging and doing everything it needs to do to replicate, which is really fascinating to me. So I ended up choosing microbiology as a major. It didn't hurt that I believe you could take the easier physical chemistry to graduate, not the harder physical chemistry. So that was great, because that was, that's a difficult class, right? Most people remember their PChem from undergrad. Yep. And so, really liked it, and started thinking about, as I was getting closer to graduation, what do I want to do next? And, I could go work in industry. I was as an undergrad in a lab, and I was doing research in a lab, and, I knew a lot of people in the lab, and I, was good friends with the tech in the lab, did a lot of research. And I thought, well, I could go be a tech, or I could go to grad school. or some post-secondary graduation schooling, and started thinking about, well, maybe I want to go be a doctor. Maybe I'll go to med school. And I just decided, that really wasn't for me. I didn't really want to see patients every day. And so I thought, well, I'm going to do a PhD. I really like this science thing. I really like being in a lab doing research. And, look, I could go be a tech, or I could basically make, maybe a somewhat similar amount of money in a stipend, but I'll end up at the, the back end of 5 years with an advanced degree. And so, so that's what I decided to do. And I wrote a bunch of cover letters for grad school. And as I started thinking about, well, what do I want to do after grad school? I realized that I really wanted to bridge business and science somehow. And that goes back again to early days of like really liking the stock market and investing and business. And I just realized I wanted to do something that bridged the two. I was pretty good at communicating complex ideas in science to people who didn't have science backgrounds. And so, I thought, well, I'm gonna do that, but I have no idea how I'm gonna do that. I have no idea what that job's gonna look like, what that career is gonna be, but I'm gonna do it. And so I applied to a bunch of grad schools, and I ended up choosing one. I chose Penn because they had a really strong business school, and they offered a lot of, programs and extracurricular activities that really bridged business and science and gave, even science and scientists exposure to business concepts and ideas. And so that's why I chose Penn. And an interesting story is when I was defending my PhD, my thesis advisor, I didn't know he was going to do this. Before I got up there and presented, it's a little bit of formality. You're good, and you're gonna be successful at that point and finish your PhD. But he kind of said, and he pulled out the letter and he had it printed out, and he basically read like, this is what Matt said he was going to do, and this is what he did, because I actually had a job offer from L.E.K at the time. And, he knew that's what I was going to go do. And so it was really great and I forgot about that letter. And so it was really great to go back and just kind of see like, I set out to do something, and I was able to accomplish it. So I thought that was, pretty great. And so, so after my PhD, I ended up at L.E.K, and, but anyways, that's how I ended up in bio, and why I ended up in bio. And, I guess you could blame it on the movie Outbreak.
And your 5th grade class. I mean, it's amazing how strongly sometimes maybe innocuous things our teachers don't think about influence our future career paths. And in turn, especially with your now as managing partner of a life science healthcare VC fund, in turn influences everything else. So
I know.
yeah, no, it's phenomenal. And as you talked about, from academia, you transitioned to L.E.K, and you continue to support life science and healthcare companies before you joined OUP in 2013. So you've shared a lot about your career motivations. I guess what ultimately led you to select venture?
Yeah. So, so I was at L.E.K and doing strategy consulting. L.E.K, similar to McKinsey, BCG, except they do a lot more strategy. They do less implementation work. So your projects tend to be 4 to 8 weeks on average. You turn over a lot of projects very quickly. You get to do a lot. You see a lot. I probably did over 20 projects in like 2.5 years. Worked with a really diverse group of people and companies, and really liked it. I learned a lot about business doing that. Pharma companies don't hire consultants because they need scientific input. I wasn't really using my PhD. I mean, they have countless numbers of PhDs and scientists on their team to give them feedback on any scientific topic that they could possibly want. They weren't hiring consultants for that. They're hiring consultants because they had some business problem where they didn't have enough people to solve that problem fast enough. If they had 2 people on that team and they gave them a year, they could probably do what we did, except we did it in 4 weeks with a team of 6, right? And so that's why these companies would hire us, and that's why they hired consultants. And so I would just learn a lot about business. And it was like an on-the-job MBA, which was great. But it turns out consulting is, very business oriented. If I give a spectrum, right, here's business, here's science, it's way, way over, right, on the business side of that spectrum. It really is all about that business side. So I really wanted to find something that was a little bit more balanced, where I could kind of move back towards the science side of what I was doing. And quite frankly, I didn't know what venture capital was. I heard of it, I heard of it as a thing, but I didn't really know what they did day to day and how it really worked. I was in Philly, right? I was in Philadelphia for my PhD. I wasn't in Boston. I wasn't in San Francisco. I feel like today, if you do your PhD in Boston or San Francisco, like, all about VC and startups. I mean, it's everywhere. It's so pervasive. But Philly, not necessarily, especially not, back in, when I was doing my PhD, it really wasn't pervasive. There wasn't a lot of venture funds here at all. So, so it turned out I was just looking around for something new. I thought maybe I'd end up in strategy or business development in a pharma company. I also looked at sort of off the wall ideas. I interviewed with an advertising agency in New York City that did a lot of pharma advertising, that hired PhDs and MDs to sort of make sure that they weren't going outside the realms of what was allowed in terms of, DTC advertising. I was just looking around for something, different and interesting and stimulating. And honestly, I was just at the right place at the right time. I had met a recruiter at GlowCap, which is a pretty well-known recruiting firm. There's a lot of private equity, some VC recruiting. And I saw a job posting on their website for a venture capital fund based in Philadelphia, which I was like, oh, great. I love Philly. I can move back to Philly. It sounds awesome. And, they're one of the few recruiting firms that actually puts jobs postings on, or that they're searching for on their website. Like most recruiters don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just lucky. And I just reached out to the GlowCap recruiter I knew and said, hey, can you just throw my resume in on this? Sounds interesting. It was this venture fund. They work with universities, early stage research. I was like, oh, sounds really interesting. And so threw the resume in. They wanted to interview me, a couple times, and I just got lucky. Just the rest was history. They liked me and brought me on. And so, and for me, as I said, I didn't know a lot about venture capital at the time. I didn't know exactly what I would be doing day to day, but I honestly just took a chance on the people. I really liked the people I interviewed with here. I thought they'd be really good mentors. They seemed like really reasonable people. And so more than anything, I was taking a chance on the people here, an opportunity to move back to Philadelphia where, I really like it here. And it just turned out to be a great fit. And so, I've been here since. But honestly, that's how I got here. A lot of luck, and some just, doing little things along the way that said, that told OUP that, hey, this person could do this job.
It sounds like a lot of hard work with it as well, but it's taking a chance on the people is always something that I think, at least from what we've heard, having conversations like this, number one driver every time. And so, as you said, you started as an associate way back when, and recently you became one of OUP's life science managing partners, actually as recent as this April. So congratulations, man.
Oh, thank you, appreciate it.
That sounds like you still continue to like the people and like the firm.
I do, right? So there was only 3 managing partners here, 2 tech, 1 life science. So, I'm the second life science managing partner, and it's great to be able to, now, step into this sort of co-management role with my partner, Bill. And, what's great, I'm learning a whole new set of skills and, growing into a role that, quite frankly, like they've never promoted somebody from associate to managing partner before. So, I get to figure it out, which is fun.
More broadly, I think. Yeah. No, so it speaks really well to your own experience, but also the fact that OUP likes to work with its people, as you say. And so, can you tell us a little bit more about what that journey was like, your evolution, the firm's evolution over this past decade?
Yeah, absolutely. When I joined, it was a small group. It was myself. I was an associate. We had a senior associate, Marty Lair, on the team, and then Bill. I mentioned my partner now, Bill, who was managing the 2 of us. And about a year in, Marty left after I started, which was really scary. Right? I'd only been here a year. This guy who'd been here for like 3 years or 4 years now, he started as an analyst and became an associate. He was leaving, and I was like, oh, okay, it's just going to be a managing partner and me, and I'm going to do all the work. Like, this seems really hard, but it was an opportunity, right? You had to look at it as an opportunity. Marty was a great mentor. He taught me so much. He's kind of one of the go-to people here in Philly that everyone knows. Mm-hmm. He taught me a lot of the soft skills in venture, right? There's the technical stuff. How do you analyze a term sheet? How do you build a cap table? How do you do this, that? But the soft side of it, how do you interact with CEOs? How do you interact with people at other venture funds? How do you get yourself out there? How do you build a brand for yourself? he's just really good at that networking side of things. So just being able to see how he did it, emulate him, really taught me a lot. But when he left, I had to grow, very quickly. Until we hired a replacement, I was covering everything, and it was a lot. But we were able to bring on additional people. I took on training roles for those new hires. I was able to grow through training other people. I know I trained people at L.E.K, and so I'd done a little bit of that before. But it's different, right? When in a kind of a new job. But never looked back. I've loved every minute of it and continue to love it. And along the way, the firm has grown a lot, a ton. I talked about, we started with 4 universities and we have 100 now. We were tracking, I think when I started, we had maybe tracking 1,000 companies from 20 universities or so. And as I said, we track 9,000 now from 100. I mean, we've really exploded in terms of growth. The team's quadrupled from when I joined, across both life science and tech. I think we've really solidified what our position is in the ecosystem, across venture and tech transfer and how we sit at that intersection. As I mentioned, we have efforts in company formation now, that we've done with some other VCs that we work really well with. So the models continue to evolve a lot, and it's great to see where we've gone and where we can go. I mean, I think there's a tremendous amount of growth for us over the next 20 years. I mean, when I joined, we were a startup. I still feel like we're a startup. Now that we're 12 years in, or the fund's 12 years in, there's still so many places we can go and grow. And in Philly, where there isn't other life science or therapeutics early stage venture funds in town, there really aren't. How can we position ourselves as the leader here, as the ecosystem continues to grow?
And being at that intersection, you were talking about business and biology, and talking about now being in venture and feeling like a startup, which is always, at least to me, the most exciting place to be. Yeah. So it sounds like, and I'd love to hear more about this, you've grown, you've evolved, you've had that opportunity. How has your personal mission evolved with it?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I only had this vague sense initially of, how would I bridge science and business, and how do you actually find a career doing that? It's hard. And, but I think that mission has been consistent throughout my career. As I said, one of the things where I think I'm pretty good, and I don't know, people could tell me I'm not, but I think I'm pretty good at communicating complex ideas. I think I'm pretty good at saying, and distilling a very complicated science into something that, people who don't have that background can really digest and understand. When it comes to giving feedback to your, the CEOs in your portfolio on how to pitch, who are you pitching? What's your audience? How are they going to receive it? What are they going to be thinking about? That's something I'm really good at, putting myself in, the opposite party's shoes and thinking about that in real time and on the fly. And so, I think now I really just get to help others do that and complement, what they do best. And honestly, never good in the lab with that pipette in my hand, as a PhD student. I never want to go back there. I can't tell you how many failed PCR runs, Western blots, or what have you that I ran, just because, wow, I didn't mix that properly, or I used something that, that's spoiled and I didn't realize it, or what have you. I just didn't have that, I didn't have that. But what I love, even at L.E.K, right, getting to work on a lot of different projects, not necessarily all at the same time, but over 2 years, 20 plus projects. I mean, it's awesome. And that's what I like about venture too, right? I get to work on a lot of different things all at the same time.
Track 9,000 startups.
We track a lot of companies. I get to work on invest in a bunch of companies. But what's different about this than consulting is now I get to see what happens. When we make the investment, we continue to be involved. We get to see what the outcome. Whereas in consulting, you make a recommendation and then you go away, and you often don't know what happened.
While we're on the topic, do you have any advice for those listening who might be a bit earlier in their careers and seeking to pursue venture?
Yeah, look, and I've been saying this for a long time, and I've said this at universities where I'll give talks, and someone from the audience will raise their hand and say, tell me about how you got into venture. Do you have any advice for people who want to do what you're doing? And the first thing I usually tell people is just think about the odds. What are the odds you're going to get a job in venture? People could argue my math here, but I think you have a better chance of being a professional football player in the NFL than you do breaking into life science venture capital. Though I do that math because I say there's 217 new players drafted each year from college that go into the NFL. And I'm pretty sure there aren't 217 new associates hires in life science venture capital every year. Fairly confident that's not true. So, it just takes a lot of time and effort. You got to network, but even before that, set yourself up, right? If you know you want to do this, don't just start thinking about it when you're, wrapping up your PhD and, decided you didn't want to do a postdoc anymore. And you have nothing on your resume that speaks to interest outside of being a scientist. You got to get involved early, get things on your resume, have experiences. It tells folks looking at your resume that, hey, this person has been thinking about this a long time. I'm not just going to hire them and in 6 months they're going to decide they hate it and they're going to leave after I've trained them, right? They've done some experience that are similar. They've kind of gotten their feet, they've gotten involved in some things, and I have some confidence that they're not going to decide this isn't for them 6 months in. So it's really important to get those experiences on your resume. And then just, as I said, a lot of effort, network, and ultimately it can be a lot of luck, right? As I said, I got lucky. I saw a job posting on a website. I'm from Philly. I did my PhD in Philly. The firm was based in Philly and they wanted somebody to move to Philly. Not everyone wants to move to Philly, quite frankly. I mean, that's not something everyone wants to do. And so, I happened to be the right person, at the right time, and that was luck. But I will say that I do think the venture industry needs to do a better job of taking sort of the bias out of sort of that luck piece. I think some people, you could argue, are luckier than others based on, where they come from, who they know, experiences they've had, or they've been afforded based on their, their standing in life. And, so I think that, I never knew anyone in venture capital. No one in my family knew anyone in venture capital. My parents had nothing to do with venture capital or life sciences or anything like that whatsoever. I got it because I saw a posting at the right time, and I was willing to move back to Philadelphia. But oftentimes, everyone knows it's because of who you know, and it's your connections. But I think a lot of VC funds are trying to improve on that. There's a lot of programs I've seen over the last couple of years to just get more diversity in the door at the beginning stage. And that again, that comes from filling the top of the funnel. You have to have a diverse set of candidates to land on somebody who is, a diverse candidate that you actually want to bring on. If you start with a whole top of the funnel with non-diverse candidates, I mean, you're not going to end up with one. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. So I think it comes down to filling that top of the funnel and affording people, more opportunities to see what it is, get involved, because they maybe aren't doing their PhD at MIT or Harvard. Maybe they're doing their PhD somewhere else and they just don't get exposure. So, I think these programs that can get people from all over the country exposure to it are really great.
As a first-generation American and college student, very much second that. But let's turn things back to OUP. You gave us a great overview before about how OUP sits at the intersection of academia and venture capital, and it's helping support spin-outs, but also now starting to get more involved in venture creation itself. And as you mentioned, since 2019, you've been exclusively investing in startups spun out of universities. So you talked a lot about it, but can you give us a little bit more in terms of detail on how OUP approaches working with universities?
Absolutely. So, so we have, as I said, we have 100 partners. We have 100 universities we work with. 20 of them are our core partners, and that's, as I said, these are the fundamentally most interesting, universities that create the most startups and most prolific at forming new startups. And these are the ones that receive a lot of venture capital financing. Mm-hmm. As I said earlier, this is all about these, partnering with them to get the participation rights that they sign to us, that they're not exercising. We share back our profits with those universities. Beyond just that transactional side, we actually strive to work really closely with them and transparently with the office at those institutions. We actually have a university relations team of 3 individuals. All they do is try to build programming for the tech transfer offices to help them do what they do better, whether that's giving talks to them, having databases of information that are collections of things that come from all of our universities. We hold a core partner summit where the directors from the 20 universities get together and just talk about topics that are of interest to them. And so we just really do a lot to try to build sense of community and share best practices. And honestly, to try to address some of the challenges that, we hear from VCs or entrepreneurs all the time. Why is it so difficult to license technology, right, from universities?
Yep.
Well, some of that's just, they're siloed. These universities are siloed. Why does MIT do it this way? Why does Yale do it that way? Why isn't it the same? They're siloed. They don't necessarily all, historically have talked to each other. And so part of what we're trying to do is get that community together, build some best practices, and get things that'll work for everyone. The reality in tech transfer is nobody loves them. You have the administration who views them as a cost center because most of the tech transfer offices are not profitable. Very few end up profitable from all these licenses they're doing because most startups fail and most don't make any money. So very few of these tech transfer offices themselves are actually profitable. So most of them just end up being cost centers. The startups don't like them because they view them as a barrier to getting funding or advancing the technology. Faculty don't like them because, again, they view them as a barrier to, filing IP or getting the technology out there and licensed and translated. So what we do is we try to show them love. We try to be that group that says, we love you. We want to help you do what you do. We help them. We help advise faculty on potential paths forward for their technology. We want to be the first place that they call and say, here's a friendly ear, here's a friendly voice. This is low pressure. You pitch this other VC fund, maybe you get one shot. If they say no, you can't go back to them ever again, right? That's not us. We want to talk to you over time. We want to see things emerge, and we want to be that low risk first conversation for faculty or students or whomever. And so that, that's kind of how, we select and establish these partnerships really just based on, how prolific these institutions are, how much venture capital they receive. And I think at this point, we added Stanford and MIT a few years ago. I think at this point we really have, almost everyone we'd like to have. So, we feel great about kind of where we're at.
Oh, it's phenomenal. And it's clear you do a lot to support these universities and support these partnerships. Is there, maybe I should take a pause then and ask on behalf of the universities, is there anything you'd recommend for a university seeking to reach out to potentially partner with OUP?
Yeah, I mean, the person to go through is Kirsten Loita, who's a partner, runs our university relations team. Kirsten was at Stanford doing tech transfer for 20 years under Kathy Koo. And so Kirsten is one of you. She's a tech transfer professional, and she understands what it is you do and how you do it. And so she is, really in charge for us of figuring out who else we should partner with. And we'll selectively add a few new partners into our associate partner pool, probably over the next, 5 years or so. But yeah, I mean, that's I would suggest reaching out to Kirsten. If you don't know her, reach out to me and I'll get you in touch with her. Yeah, always would love to talk to people.
No, and Kirsten's great. I've been chatting with her for a few years now and talking about diversity programming. We connected on Equalize a few years back, which is a phenomenal accelerator program for female-led startups, which is something we need to see more of in the life sciences.
It was a great idea that WashU had. We're super happy that we can co-run it, co-sponsor it with WashU. And yeah, it's been great to see that over the years.
So as we talk about this, how have you seen, being at that intersection yourselves, how have you seen technology commercialization develop over this past decade? Can you share a little bit more about the best practices you're talking about and how those streamline that process of getting through a TTO?
Yeah, well, technology commercialization is definitely accelerated. I think everyone knows that, right? The idea of doing startups is totally mainstream now. I think 10 years ago or 15 years ago, I know institutions where junior faculty were told that they were not allowed to do a startup until they got tenure. Like they just weren't, the senior faculty there told them, you may not do a startup. I think now there's tenure evaluations that evaluate, do you have any startups? And that's a positive. If you've got startups, like you're more likely to get tenure. So I think there's been a huge sort of shift in mentality at universities. I think the ivory tower concept has come down, and I think now the idea of academic industry partnership is mainstream. It's great. And I think universities and tech transfer have become really supportive in getting technology into startups rather than just, it's got to go into a big company, right? How's the startup ever going to be able to see, create value with this? I think now universities increasingly say, I'd rather do a startup than put this in the hands of big pharma, for example. But with regards to best practices, I think streamlining the process is something that's always top of mind for everyone. How do you streamline the process? How do we make it easier to license technology or get an option to something? I see a lot of talk about it, and I think what's lacking in that discussion, and it's often entrepreneurs leading those discussions or investors leading those discussions, is I don't think they're including tech transfer professionals in those discussions. I think if you're going to do this, you need to be collaborative. Don't come at it from a combative stance. Come at it from a collaborative stance. Bring the tech transfer folks or the leaders in tech transfer from around the country into your discussions, into your thought leadership. Understand or try to put yourself in their shoes. What are they dealing with? As I said, nobody loves them. Nobody loves them. What are they dealing with? What are the realities of their job? If they let something go for cheap, if they give you a license and there's no royalties, they get no equity, maybe they get a little bit of milestones, and that technology ends up going into a startup and is the next Google and is worth a ton of money, the administration is going to fire somebody in that tech transfer office, no doubt. Because the university, they'll be told they did not capture enough value in that license for the university, for all the effort the university put into training faculty, hiring faculty, providing them resources to do what they do. So they can't just let it go. They can't just give it away. That's just not how it works. So as I was saying, you have to be collaborative, bring them into the process, understand where they're coming from and what are their needs and what are their issues. Bring in investors, bring in entrepreneurs, bring in attorneys. Some universities, they're public institutions. There may be, state institutions. There's certain things that they're not allowed to do legally based on state law. That might be different than a private institution. So you maybe licensed something from a private institution 10 years ago, and you go to a state institution. Why are they giving me such a hard time? Why can't they do that? This might be state law. They may not be legally allowed to. So there's a lot of details. And I think just everyone needs to kind of calm down and say, hey, look, just getting up there and yelling at how hard it is, or why can't it be this way? It just doesn't help. I think you got to just try to be collaborative and get everyone together and do that.
And so as we think about collaborating then, do you think there's an opportunity, and you're talking about hosting summits to discuss best practices across universities, do you think there's an opportunity, keeping in mind obviously things like state law and individual university regulations? I'm not sure if anything comes up from university charters, for example, that dictate certain aspects. Keeping all those things in mind, do you think there's an opportunity, and maybe OUP is already starting to work on this through the summits? There is standardization of practice.
Yeah, there is, and there's efforts ongoing. We participated alongside some other really great VC funds and great law firms in some efforts to see whether we could create a license template. So we all kind of know as VCs and companies, and we know about the NVCA investment documents that have been standardized. So the idea is could you do that for license documents? Yes and no. It turns out it's really hard. Every license can be so unique and have unique circumstances in terms of what is the IP, how important is it to the startup? Is it the core of the startup? Is it on the app and the sort of tangential to the core technology? There's so many unique circumstances. And so, yes, you can try to get some agreement around some clauses and some terms, but you're never going to see a template license agreement with the economics filled in advance. You're just not going to see it. Everything is so unique. And so my number one piece of advice to anyone who's going to go negotiate a license for academic technology is, and this comes from me listening to our tech transfer colleagues and what they say, is that you need to actually get yourself invested one-to-one in those business negotiations and hammer out the issues with whoever is sitting in the license office, the licensing office, sitting across from you in those negotiations. If you just tell your attorney, hey, go negotiate this for me and come back when you have something for me to sign, you'll get exactly what you pay for, which is, a heavily negotiated, protracted process that you are going to pay a ton of money for because you're paying those attorneys hourly. And it's going to take a really long time. So if you want something to happen quickly, sit down with the other party, talk through the issues both sides have. Where can you give? Where can they give? Where can they not give? Where can you not give? And see if you can get alignment. Of course, hire a law firm. You have to have an attorney. It's really important, but get involved. But one other suggestion is find a partner at a firm that's done at least, I don't know, 10 deals with that university you're working with already, because they're already going to know where the university will absolutely not give, where they can absolutely not change the language, and you don't have to spend cycles negotiating, right? And that, which again extends the process. So there's little things on the entrepreneur side that you can do that I think will make the process faster.
And it sounds like the key one is treat people like people with respect. Yeah. So
exactly. These tech transfer folks, some of them have been doing it a really long time, and sometimes they can do licenses in a few days. It all depends on what's needed.
Well, let's now turn things back to your venture work. And as you said, you invest as a firm across a lot of deep tech, software, cybersecurity, semiconductors, even climate tech and other spaces to back over 125 companies. Now, you yourself are more in the life science space. And I just love to understand, even if you don't have clear investment theses, how do you think about where you make investments? You talked about therapeutics, devices, diagnostics, and potentially research tools. Just curious to understand a little bit more.
Yeah, so we, as I said, we, primarily invest in therapeutics. That's where we spend most of our time. We can be stage agnostic, but we're always looking for the same things. We're looking for great founders or great management teams, a technology or asset that's going to change a paradigm or a standard of care, with enough data to believe that, that's feasible, that they can actually do what they say they're going to do. Mm-hmm. And a credible, well thought out plan that's going to take that company through the next inflection point or de-risking point, right? Valuations go up because the risk goes down. That's the only reason why valuations go up, is because something gets less risky. It doesn't, the valuations, you can talk about macroeconomic indicators. Those things go up and down and they bounce around, but fundamentally, valuations of companies go up because they become less risky. It's all about revenue. Even for a biotech company that's preclinical, one day you could achieve X amount of revenue. And then if you discount all the risk all the way back, you say, okay, this is kind of what it's worth. That's one way of looking at it. And so every time you make it less risky, you're one step closer to achieving huge revenue. So that, we look for a plan that can actually do that and get it through some point that we think actually de-risks it. And academic spinouts can be, they can be really, really, really early. But I think there are lots of great programs within universities, outside universities, PIs can access that help advance their projects before forming their company, right? And so I mentioned we recently formed and co-seeded a company called Mitochondria Motion from WashU in St. Louis, and the PI had received Harrington Discovery Institute money, which is a great program. They afford these companies a ton of, pharma executive insight across a whole diverse, deeply technical areas of science. And, the investigator, the PI there, Gerald Dorn, he advanced that project, I'd say way further than we typically see coming out of academia, which made it really interesting and really attractive. It was ripe to become a startup and go. And so, I think, in an environment that we're in right now where it's kind of difficult to raise money, it can't hurt to explore every avenue you have to keep something in-house a little bit longer and advance it a little bit further.
So as we're talking about all these companies, as we're talking about spinning up university newcos, do you have any recommendations for academic founders who might be interested in reaching out to OUP?
Just please reach out. Cold, warm, it doesn't matter. I think one of the things we pride ourselves in is just getting back to people, responding, even if it's a no, we're not interested or it's not a fit, we want to be able to get back to you. And preferably don't do it through a bank. Like don't reach out to us through your investment bank. Just reach out directly. We want to speak to you and the team. We want to get to know you in the process. And especially if you're thinking about or in process of licensing technology from one of the 100 universities we work with, there's a good chance we may have already heard about it or heard about the technology at least. So just reach out if we haven't already spoken. We want to be part of the discussions early with your fundraising process, even if not for us or it's too early. We can often try to introduce you to someone who may be a better fit for. And so, yeah, let us be helpful to you however we can.
No, I think that also leads perfectly into where I wanted to go next, which is you've talked about value add to the startups you work in, and I just love to hear, what does being a good partner to especially your portfolio companies mean to you guys over at OUP?
Yeah, we sort of alluded to this earlier, right? Which is, at OUP, we think pretty broadly about how we can add value to our portfolio companies. We ask ourselves, does being the third or fourth VC on a board really add any value to the discussions in the boardroom? Honestly, we don't think so. I mean, we don't think, being the fourth VC on the board is going to help. So unless we're asked to be on the board, because we're maybe one or of two investors in a syndicate, we try not to take unnecessary board seats. We don't demand them. That said, we'll be board observers. I think it's important to be in the room to be helpful, right? If we don't know what you need, or what you need help with, we can't help. So it's good to be in the room. So we'll be board observers. We'll weigh in as necessary. But where we think we can add a lot more value is through our university relationships and the really vast types of technologies that we see. We'll ask our portfolio companies, what technologies are you looking for? What do you need right now? What could be complementary to what you have? And so if it's a new, more assets, adjacent technologies, because, hey, we're an oligo company and we need technology to deliver it to somewhere, maybe we could help find a delivery technology that makes sense. And we'll connect people, where appropriate. And we've had several examples in the portfolio where we've connected interesting university technologies, and the portfolio company, took an option on that to evaluate it or took a license. So, that's where we think we can be most helpful. And so, we ask our portfolio, try to leverage us, let us know what it is you're looking for, what you need to see. Let us comb through our database. Let us reach out to the, we know who within the tech transfer offices at every one of these universities, what they cover, what technologies they cover, what they do. We can reach out in a very targeted way and say, hey, our portfolio company X is looking for Y. Do you have any disclosures or faculty working on Y? And they will let us know, and then we can let you know. And so that's what we try to do.
I might reach out myself, Matt. That sounds phenomenal. And as we think about supporting these companies, we also, especially as investors, I find nowadays, think about supporting them in their team growth and their company building. So especially given OUP's involvement and investment from the earliest stages of company formation, how do you think about interdisciplinary teams supporting them and building long-lasting company cultures?
Yeah, so company formation is really, really hard, especially from the people side of it. The pace of new company creation, and Bruce Booth has published a lot about this, right, in biotech. It's absolutely limited by talent and people available to actually run these companies. University tech transfer offices will tell you that their biggest issue is identifying talent to take their technologies, that there are people that can take these raw technologies and these ideas and turn them into companies that can go somewhere and actually get investment, right? Investable companies. It's especially true for universities outside of Boston and San Francisco. But I'll tell you, even Harvard will say our number one issue, our number one problem is we don't have enough good entrepreneurs to run with these technologies. And so, even in the best ecosystems, it's a challenge. And so the new company creation is absolutely paced by the availability of great people. So then you ask, like, what can be done? Right? How do we improve on this? So there are lots of programs out there right now, I think, that want to teach young entrepreneurs, young founders, how to be successful in biotech. And I think that's great. I think there's a ton of great content that they're putting together. A lot of those resources are things you can just click on the internet and read. If I want to find out, how do I lease space, or where do I go to get some benches? You can read, oh, here's a list of places I could reach out to and try to find. I think that's great, because a lot of people just don't even know where to start. But it's not, it's great, but it's not a substitute. I still want to say it's not a substitute at startup, for actually doing and learning on the job. I think nothing can replace actually being in a startup, doing the work, and learning from other people that you're working with. Whether that's, you come in as a director of business development or the chief business officer instead of the CEO, or you become the CSO and not the CEO, and you bring in someone who's done that before, you're going to learn so much. And then when you get to your next startup, because you're going to have a next startup, of course, you're going to be ready. You're going to be ready for that role because you'll have already done a lot of it and you'll have seen a lot of it and how it's done, and you'll just make less mistakes. So what really needs to happen is senior leaders at these startups need to give back. They need to continue to give back. They need to make it a point to train the next generation of leader. And so I think identifying, hey, my director of corp dev has got huge potential. This guy is going to be a CBO one day, even if that means you may lose them to another company. I think it's really important to do that. You asked a little bit about how do you support interdisciplinary teams at the company formation stage. I think it's really hard. I think it's really time consuming. For my earliest companies, at the seed stage, they need a lot more involvement from me, than other companies. But you have to make yourself available. I think, I make myself available for sort of weekly scheduled calls for an hour to review and discuss sort of questions, or just be a sounding board for the CEO if they need to rant or vent. That's what you're there for. Because it can be really lonely, I think, being a CEO in a seed stage startup. There's maybe one other person on the team or two other people. I mean, it could be just that one person on the team. I think that gets really lonely. I think you can feel really isolated. I think they just often just need someone to listen, reflect on the issues they're having, and then just, if appropriate, help, right? Can you make a connection to someone else who may have experienced the same thing or the same problem? Where you can start to take a step back is once they start building a team, they have other people to help them. They get paired up maybe with a chair on the board, or someone who's, not an investor, but, maybe an entrepreneur who's been there and done that. That person then transitions and can become their sounding board. So at the seed stage, it's really time consuming, and you kind of have to get really involved and be helpful, and, as helpful as you can. Company culture, from my perspective, is huge. I think most people feel that way. When I'm interviewing CEOs for one of our portfolio companies, it's one of my, number one questions that I'll ask them. Team's everything, and, teams stick together because of great culture. Even if things are tough, even if maybe there's setbacks or there hasn't been just one success after another within sort of technology development, they're going to stick together because they love the culture. They love working together. But as the investor or even a board member, I don't dictate culture. I can't. I'm not there every day. I'm not living that culture. That's the CEO's job. The CEO's job is to influence culture. Maybe they appoint the chief culture czar at the company. That's fine. You could delegate your responsibility if you want to, but if you don't delegate, it's got to be you, and as the CEO. And my job as a director or investor in the company is just be sure they're thinking about it a lot when they're hiring or beyond, and just in the board meeting, asking the question. So what's going on at the company? Are people happy? Did you lose anyone? How do you think people are feeling? Those are questions around culture. And so checking in from time to time is important. But really making sure you put people in place who have an eye towards that.
Oh, that's a great point, and that's one that I think is not always asked and talked about in the boardroom. So
yeah, I mean, honestly, as I'm thinking about it, right, like, if you are a founder and you're going to run your company and you're just coming out of, you're finishing your Ph.D. in the lab, how do you think? You should ask yourself, how do I think the culture in the lab or at my institution should be different than the culture in my startup? Because I'll tell you from experience, those cultures should be vastly different. You should not run your startup with the culture that you experience in the lab doing your PhD. You just really should. Maybe there's some really great, very, very special labs and places that have startup-like culture. It was not my experience. In academia, there's a lot of pettiness. There's a lot of people who don't know how to work together or play well with others. There's people who get mad at you if you borrow a pipette off their bench and then don't put it exactly where you found it, back into their little holder, and you put it 2 slots to the left. I mean, it could get really weird in academia from my experience. So, God, that stuff cannot happen in startups. You can't hire somebody who acts that way. It will crush your culture. So I think as somebody who's never been in that culture before, gosh, I'm going to be worried. Like, does this person know how to build the right culture internally? Are they going to hire the right people? And so, again, it's a really important question that founders have to be asking themselves. Do they even know what good culture looks like?
And it can be hard to do that, especially if you're coming straight out of academia, as you said.
Yeah. You may not know what it looks like. You may have no idea. You may have never seen it before.
So taking this in a slightly different direction. I mean, you spent a long time now exploring investing in the life sciences, and you are tracking a huge number of really exciting emerging technologies. So I would love to hear, what are you most excited by right now?
Yeah, there's a lot. We're at this incredible revolution in biotech, which is great. But maybe give some specifics, right? Because I think that's what people are most interested in hearing. I think there's some themes. Drugging the undruggable, I think, is a big theme. Whether that's protein degradation, RNA manipulation. How do you get after targets that have no structure or loosely structured? How do we do that? So I think that's a big theme right now. How do you deliver genetic medicines in a more targeted way? I think there's been a ton of success through the pandemic with COVID vaccines, Moderna and Pfizer and BioNTech. That's been awesome to see genetic medicines, explode. But, how do we deliver them to move beyond just sort of infectious disease vaccines in a much more targeted way to organs where, it's harder to get them to, right? Liver's easy, where else can you get them to? I think going after CNS disease, it's huge unmet need, no doubt about it, whether that's neurodegeneration or neuropsychiatric. But I think, this is the way we think about it. I think a lot of folks think about it this way. You have to have an eye towards human genetics. There's just been a tremendous amount of failure in that space. It seems, and the data probably bears this out, that it's riskier than other therapeutic areas. So how do you de-risk? And I think there's good data now that says programs, and this isn't CNS specific, but programs with human genetic validation of the target are twice as likely to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
It goes from 4% to 8%. It's good. That's a meaningful increase. So I think having an eye towards human genetics is probably really important. I think, maybe less innovative, but drugging targets or pathways that have already been validated with biologics, injectables, but being able to either deliver those injectables orally or actually move towards small molecules. How do we can we create small molecule approaches to targeting targets where, we've only believed that you have to use an antibody, for example? I think it's a really interesting place. I think it can be less risky because you kind of the target's already validated. It's just a question of, can you drug it sufficiently with a small molecule? And then I think addressing huge unmet needs in autoimmune disease. I think, we've had some really great advances in oncology over the last several decades. I think, we're on the precipice of perhaps seeing similar advances in autoimmune disease. There's totally different challenges, particularly with regard to safety. These are not diseases necessarily that will kill you. And they are not diseases, and they are diseases that you're going to have for the rest of your life, and maybe have to take the drug, short of genetic engineering, maybe for the rest of your life. So there's the safety considerations versus oncology are totally different. Presents a whole new set of challenges. But I think that's an area where, hopefully we'll see a lot of advancement over the next decade.
Taking this in a slightly different direction then. We talked about this briefly, and you highlighted the current economic climate's a bit depressed at the moment. And the rate of commercialization and spin-out seems to have dramatically slowed down as compared to the last few years. So from your position at this intersection of translation, I'd love your thoughts on this moment in entrepreneurship, and if you had any advice for those in academia seeking to spin out, how should they be thinking?
Yeah, it may not be what everyone wants to hear, but I'm going to say it anyways. Things have definitely slowed. There's been a pause from the capital markets as everyone sort of waits to see what's going to happen. There's clearly too many companies, certainly too many biotech companies on the public markets, probably too many biotech companies privately that have been formed and invested in over the last 5 to 10 years. There are not enough inflows of capital for all of them, especially as they advance to becoming clinical stage companies, where, as we know, it gets very expensive. So investors right now have paused, and they're trying to figure out how can we protect the investments we've already made rather than make new ones. And I've heard off the record from several colleagues at other venture funds that they are not making new investments right now. They're just not. They're not telling anyone that. They're not telling people we're not making new investments right now, but they will warehouse them. And in one day, maybe when they are making new investments again, maybe they'll call them up, but they're not making new investments right now. We are, interestingly, we are open for business. We are interested in making a few new investments here to wrap up, our third fund.
Cheers.
But it's slow, and we're not seeing a lot of things that we're interested in investing in right now for whatever reason. Maybe it's because valuations haven't come down and haven't reflected what's happened to the public markets yet, as people try to hold on to their last round's valuation for as long as they can. Some of it is just there's not syndicate partners. As I said, people aren't investing. So, we don't want to go it alone. That creates way too much financing risk. We want people that we can co-invest with. Drug discovery is too hard, too expensive. You want to do it with people who have deep pockets, and you want to do it with smart people who can help, open up doors and windows and, dig trenches to get it over the finish line. Right now, also, you probably need more data than you've needed in the last 5 years to launch a new biotech startup out of academia. Where I think in the last 5 years, you could bring a really interesting idea for a target. Maybe there's some validation of that target in a hot area, or a technology, a platform in a hot area, and you could get it funded. Now, I don't know. I mean, when I started doing venture 9 years ago, we didn't really invest in things that didn't have in vivo animal model data. Like, we're like, oh, come back to us when you have in vivo animal model data. Everyone used to say that all fell apart, right? Everyone kept going earlier and earlier and earlier. I think we're going to go back there. I mean, I honestly think that people are going to say, hey, do you have any animal in vivo data yet? And if the answer is no, it's like, okay, great. When you have some animal in vivo data, come back to me, in some animal model. There's some diseases in some places where, well, hey, there is no animal model. It's like, okay, well, let's talk it out. I'm not saying that we're not going to invest in something that fundamentally doesn't have an animal model, but if there is one, let's see it. Let's see how it looks. Compare it to standard of care, or compare it to the drug that just got through phase 2 that blew away standard of care. Show me you're going to be better than that. So I think you're going to need that now. And I really think we're headed back there. So what does all that mean? That means keep it in academia, maybe as long as you can right now. Advance it with generate as much data as you can to get people comfortable before you spin it out. Because fundraising right now it's just really, really tough. It's not fun. Doesn't mean if you're an academic, doesn't hurt to go have some VC conversations. Ask them what they want to see. Say, hey, I'm reaching out to you for advice, not for money. We're not ready to fund it. We're not ready to do a startup. We're not ready to raise money. Just looking to get some advice from you. It's a great way to approach investors. Lou, I mentioned Lou earlier, right? A Louism, that he's said that I'll never forget is if you want advice, ask for money. If you want money, ask for advice. Right? So if you go to people asking for money, maybe they'll be interested. More likely than not, and they'll give you some advice. And advice is, as I say, advice is cheap. They're not writing a check, so take it for what it's worth. But if you go and ask people for advice, and they're really interested in what you're doing, why wouldn't I say to you, well, are you raising money? How are you thinking about this? Can I invest? That's our job. We're always thinking about that. So, as I said, so ask investors for advice. What do I got to do here to get this to where, you think this could be interesting to start a company around it and get investment. So I've been saying this exact thing in medtech for a decade, right? If you're a medical device startup, do not leave academia until as long as humanly possible. Do not start a company. Just don't. Do whatever you can to engineer your device and get it into humans and get 10 patients worth of human data under an investigator-initiated or investigator-sponsored trial before you spin out and start a company and go raise money. It will be infinitely easier if you have some human data, and there are write grants, get scrappy, engineer the thing, get some prototypes, get it built to a degree where you can put it into 10 people or test it on 10 people and then go and try to raise some money around a startup idea. So we've been saying that for a long time. And so, similar now, in therapeutics, the last 5 years, things have gotten a little crazy. So, maybe keep it in-house a little bit longer, generate a little bit more data, and then bring it to people.
Well, as we wrap up, a few rapid fire questions. And
Sure.
as someone also currently living in Philly, I've been excited to see the energy around local entrepreneurship. And I'd love your thoughts as someone who's from here, someone who's spent time here. What can we do to help catalyze the life science ecosystem of Philadelphia?
Yeah. So number one for me is, can we centralize it? We have biotech entrepreneurship in Doylestown. And so most of your listeners have no idea where I'm talking about. But in Doylestown, which is like an hour outside of the city, then 90 minutes away, also outside of the city in the suburbs, is Wayne, where we have startups. And then you can drive into the city from Wayne 45 minutes, and then you get into Center City, and we have startups there. I mean, how are collisions or natural collisions going to happen? You go to Cambridge and you go to the coffee shop and you bump into like everyone in VC, startup, big companies, small companies, you just bump into people. It's all in a small sort of centrally located area. Yes, and companies have had to move out and go to Watertown and all these different places because cost of labs and stuff. But but the events are all in Cambridge and everyone goes and everyone's there. I mean, Philly's just not like that. It's way too spread out. Also, when you think about recycling talent, this guy's running a company in Doylestown, and it's like, well, this other company's in Wayne. Is he going to commute an hour to do that? No, and he's not going to pick up and move his family. So it just doesn't help, I would say. So is there a way to centralize it? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. Philadelphia is like the 5th most populous city in the country, but only because our suburbs are our city limits are incredibly sprawling. Like they push way out into the suburbs. So it's just a really sprawling city as it is. So I don't know if there's a way to fix it, but I think that definitely hurts. I think we also need some success. I think success will breed more startups. And the more startups we have, the less risky it is for someone to leave Merck or GSK or BMS and go jump into a startup. If you're in a cushy job at Merck and you love your job and you've been doing it 20 years and you get a great paycheck, it's very stable and you're not, no one's going to fire you. Why leave for a startup that may or may not work out, right? An early stage company. What's your incentive? Equity, financial upside, all great incentives. That might, or the ability to sort of run your own thing, be a leader. Awesome incentives. But in the back of that person's mind, who's been in a risk-free environment for 20 years, is what if this fails? I can't go back to that job at Merck. They're going to have filled it. What do I do? And so in Cambridge or in Boston or in San Francisco, it's, well, I'm just going to I'll go to the next startup. There's 150 of them. Not so here. Maybe not so easy. So I think you need critical mass. You need that sort of that parachute for people to be willing to jump. And it's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of time, a lot of effort. I'd love to see the venture ecosystem built up here. There are, I think we're the only VC doing early stage therapeutics investing in Philadelphia. I don't think I'm leaving anyone out. I think there's a few new groups that are doing like some private, some public, but not necessarily just like traditional biotech early stage VC. There's been funds in the past that sort of aren't around anymore. So I think we got to build that back up. I think feeling, we need people here. It's gonna take time. And
I think all of these are great tenets for any ecosystem that's looking to add to their life science network and build up.
Yeah, I mean, we got great science here. Philly has no shortage of tremendously talented scientists, faculty at Penn, Drexel, Temple, University of Sciences. I mean, gosh, we got great science. There's no issue there. Penn's got one of the preeminent immunology departments in the entire world. It's fantastic faculty. But that's not enough.
No, we have to give the academic work somewhere to go.
Yeah.
And that requires the people, the money, the space, and the concentration of all three to make it happen right there with you.
And it goes to Boston now. And it's a 45, you get on the airplane, it's 45 minutes, you land in Boston. I mean, it's not, most people don't view that as the end of the world. Would it be great to have it in here in Philly? I think a lot of people would say, yeah, it would be great to have it here. It's so much easier for me as the founder to get in my car and and drive for the SAB meeting, right? But that's not where we're at. And so for now, it's, that science is, the great science is getting translated. It's not going to waste. I don't want to think it's like anyone to think it's, just sitting around doing nothing. It's going to Boston, it's going to other places, but it'd be nice if we could keep it.
And last question then, having given so much advice over the course of your career, especially when people are asking for money, I'd just love to learn, what's the best advice you've ever received when it comes to your career?
Yeah. Well, thank you for asking, because now I get to shout out my dad, which, is great. The one piece of advice, as you said, that the best advice I received, was from my dad. And he said, and I'm paraphrasing, is love the people you work with first. Even if you don't love the job, if you love who you're doing it with, you'll be happy and you'll be okay. So again, that for me, just fully embracing and internalizing that when you're stepping into something, make sure you love the people that you're going to do it with. Even if you don't love the work, you may not love the work. If you love the people, you'll get by. You'll be able to do it for maybe several years, maybe more, until you find something where you love both the people and the job. But if you hate the people, you're gonna be miserable. And so it may sound obvious, but most people, when they're evaluating taking a new job or taking a new opportunity on, that's not the first thing they think about. The first thing they think about is, what is my role going to be? What am I going to be doing day to day? What's it going to look like? How much money am I going to make? The first thing you should be thinking about is, let me think of the 3 people I interviewed with, then ask, can I speak to 3 more people I didn't interview with, just for informational purposes? Can I come visit in person and meet the team? Can I spend some time? Can I take some, can we go out for lunch? Can we do something, or drink or whatever? And will you love the people? Will you enjoy it? And I've tried to take it at heart myself. And as I said, I came to OUP not fully knowing what venture was or exactly what I'd be doing day to day, other than a job, what I was written in a job description. And but I took a chance because I really liked the people, and that's worked out well.
It sounds like your dad is a wise man. Thank you again, Matt. Absolutely phenomenal conversation, and got to learn a lot about tech transfer, which is also great.
Thank Chris. Thank you so much. Great job doing the interview. Appreciate the great questions, and thank you for the platform here that you're offering with BIOS. And I think just so many great people have been on this, and I hope people are getting as much value out of it as I do when I listen to you.
Thank you for the kind words.
You're welcome, Chris.